Tonight, the government defends accusations the Prime Minister went easy on Qantas in return for free upgrades and other perks. Hello, I'm Nakari Thorpe. This is ABC News. The 3G network is switched off, impacting thousands of devices around the country. Donald Trump puts on a show at Madison Square Garden, rallying a state he's expected to lose. And 40 years after captivating the world, ice skating icons Torval and Dean prepare for their last dance. The Prime Minister is facing growing scrutiny for receiving perks from Qantas when he was the Transport Minister. It follows reports he liaised directly with the former Qantas boss, Alan Joyce, to get flight upgrades for personal trips overseas. Here's National Affairs Editor Melissa Clark.
Qantas' largesse for politicians includes free upgrades on flights and access to the exclusive Chairman's Lounge. Almost every federal MP accepts the gifts and declares them.
They'll boost us up so they can take those 2 or 3 economy seats.
I think there's a lot of people who just fly generally, get offered upgrades and take them. I think we all do that.
But the Prime Minister is under additional scrutiny, with a new book on Qantas reporting that Anthony Albanese didn't just receive flight upgrades at the gate, but liaised directly with Qantas CEO Alan Joyce about upgrades for his personal travel, including when he was the Transport Minister.
Thanks, mate. When you're talking about having a personal phone call to ask for an upgrade as the Transport Minister or the Shadow Transport Minister, I presume the Prime Minister is going to answer questions about that.
The PM has declined to detail his contact with Alan Joyce, but yesterday defended receiving the upgrades.
Every single thing has been declared. Every single thing has been declared, which is why it's been reported on.
The defence from his colleagues ranged from lukewarm.
I know that the Prime Minister was asked about this, I think, multiple times yesterday in his press conference. I don't have anything to add to it.
To full-throated attack on the opposition leader.
He's had free flights paid for by Gina Rinehart, who we know has influence over the coalition and the policy direction it takes.
Government ministers point to a number of occasions where the Labor Party has opposed Qantas's actions as evidence the Prime Minister isn't in the airline's pocket. But at the very least, receiving gifts creates the potential for a conflict of interest. And the defence that other politicians receive gifts too doesn't ameliorate that. Rather, it highlights how common it is for MPs to receive favours from corporations. Melissa Clark, ABC News, Canberra.
Federal Labor's most senior Queenslander, Jim Chalmers, has conceded his party was squarely beaten in Saturday's state election, puncturing the narrative that Labor did better than expected. Here's Chief Digital Political Correspondent Jacob Grieber.
Labor's been pushing the narrative that Saturday's Queensland election was close and could have been a lot worse. Outside of Brisbane, it's hard to see how. As the dust settles, senior federal Labor sources now concede the state result is full of bad omens for Anthony Albanese. In the regions, Labor got hammered by double-digit swings, losing some seats for the first time in more than a century. Votes are still being counted, but David Crisafulli is on par with what Joe Bjelke-Petersen won in 1986 at the peak of his popularity. Federal Labor's most senior Queenslander, Jim Chalmers, is the first to call it for what it is, a decisive victory by the LNP. And that's a worry for the Prime Minister. He needs to expand his tally of just 5 out of 30 federal seats in Queensland. And the question after Saturday is how. Strategists on both sides agree crime and cost of living were the big vote movers, and that throwing money and freebies and ideas like government petrol stations at voters is no guarantee of political success. The Treasurer is now hosing down calls for big handouts.
This election was never going to be, from our side, a free-for-all of public spending. It wasn't going to be before Saturday's outcome, and it's not going to be after Saturday's outcome.
The Greens were the other big losers. Labor says they were hurt by Max Chandler Mather's solidarity with the CFMEU. Their leader, Adam Bant, blames Labor for stealing their ideas and being too obsessed with his party instead of the LNP. It's a surprising claim, given both the Greens and Labor went backwards. In Parliament, Labor's been frustrated for months by the Greens blocking housing and environmental reforms. Now it's the Greens stressing they're ready to negotiate and cooperate to keep the coalition out of office.
Australia's 3G network is officially over. Today, Telstra and Optus began switching off the service after Vodafone and TPG did it months ago. Many were prepared for the shutdown, but others have their doubts.
You say goodbye and I say hello.
2 decades after saying hello to 3G, the nation is now saying goodbye.
Australia's remaining 3G networks will close from 28 October.
The 3G network is just not fit for purpose. So that's the main reason we're shutting it down. We're going to repurpose it for 5G, which means that we can roll out 5G much more efficiently and quicker.
Many in regional Australia have been upgrading their infrastructure for months or even years.
I've actually surveyed a few businesses today and a few of them actually said, oh, didn't that already happen? So I think they're pretty prepared.
The shutdown is happening in a staged process around the country. 3G users will first lose access to calls and data, and eventually even 000 calls will be blocked. The government says there are programs in place to give free replacement phones to vulnerable people.
Smartwatches, security systems and personal medical alarms that use the 3G network will also be affected.
Family members and neighbours will need to remind elderly people in particular that they should be looking at their telephone coverage and seeing if their telephone is up to date.
Some in rural areas aren't sold on the promise of faster speeds when black spots remain.
Supposedly I have coverage, but you can't make a call with no bars. It just drops out, which is fine if you're within the area of the house, but outside of that, no calls. So that's where I'll get a bit worried about my safety out in the farm.
We said that we would not shut down 3G until we provided complete equivalence of coverage to 3G. And we've done that.
Telstra and Optus say customers can reach out if they need support in making the shift. Adrian Reardon, ABC News.
The state's teachers have accepted the government's pay offer, ending the prospect of industrial action. They'll get a 10% pay bump spread over 3 years, including superannuation. They've also negotiated 8 pupil-free days so they can prepare for the terms ahead, and they won't be required to attend any more than an hour's worth of meetings outside the school day.
This is a significant contributor, we hope, and we know it will work, in terms of reducing the workload for teachers.
More than 1,000 jobs could be lost as universities aggressively cut costs ahead of proposed international student caps. Credit ratings agency S&P Global estimates universities will lose several $100 million in revenue.
The road ahead for Kit Nelson is looking bumpy, as he's about to be made redundant by the Australian National University.
I'm not expecting there to be 638 positions available to everybody who's about to lose a job.
After spending more than it earns, the ANU is facing a $200 million deficit this year.
Everybody's pretty upset. Morale's been very low.
Across the nation, more than 1,000 university staff are at risk of being made unemployed, including up to 300 at the University of Wollongong and 200 at the University of Canberra. All this ahead of the Albanese government's international student caps. Effectively, this will limit the number of overseas students that public unis can accept to 145,000 next year.
We estimate that universities are going to lose several $100 million of revenue in 2025.
The Vice-Chancellor of Western Sydney University says it'll be a big hit to his organisation.
It's a loss of about $80 million over 3 years, and 24 cents in every dollar that an international student pays, we use to subsidise our domestic students and other programs.
But experts say the aggressive pursuit of international student fees has led to education standards falling.
I have students who don't attend class because they can get the transcript translated. I discover repeated attempts of papers that have been written in a foreign language, almost always Chinese, and simply translated into English using an app. These aren't occasional occurrences. This is now the dominant mode of education at some of Australia's most prestigious universities.
That's the cost of running a university like a business. David Chow, ABC News.
Donald Trump has closed out his penultimate weekend of campaigning with a star-studded rally in the heart of New York City. But as Mr Trump courted votes in a state he's expected to lose, his Democratic opponent Kamala Harris was in a key battleground. North America correspondent Barbara Miller reports from New York City.
And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free.
Donald Trump loves a big crowd, and he got one in the heart of New York, the city where he made his name and fortune.
Good evening, New York City.
The Republican nominee was introduced by someone rarely seen on his campaign, his wife. It was a high-octane event featuring some of Trump's favourite support acts.
I don't see no stinking Nazis in here.
Including the world's richest man.
The future is gonna be amazing.
But once on stage, the Republican presidential candidate delivered a pretty standard stump speech.
I will end inflation. I will stop the invasion of criminals coming into our country. And I will bring back the American dream.
Thousands of supporters lined up for hours for the chance to catch a glimpse.
He loves God, he loves country, he loves our people, he loves his family, he has integrity.
Also doing the rounds are Donald Trump and a Kim Jong-un look-alike.
People love me. They really do.
Crowd size is extremely important to my friend Donald Trump.
The latter revealing himself to be a Melbourne satirist.
If he gets into power, people in Australia is going to feel the effects.
Donald Trump's very unlikely to take New York State in next week's election, but the ultimate showman has got to see his name in lights again back in the Big Apple, and for him that will count as a big win. Democratic nominee Kamala Harris was in a swing state, Pennsylvania, courting the votes of young black men and Latinos and holding her own rally.
Each of us has an opportunity to make a difference, because in this moment we do face a real question. What kind of country do we want to live in?
Kamala, you're fired. Get out.
Donald Trump will also likely be back in the battleground soon. But today was all about reminding his hometown that he's not done with it yet. Barbara Miller, ABC News, New York.
A fresh two-day truce has been proposed between Israel and Hamas. The latest deal would release at least 4 hostages and get urgent aid into Gaza. It comes as Israeli forces expand operations inside the enclave and to its north in Lebanon, with more than 70 people killed in the past 24 hours.
A school turned shelter in the Al-Shati refugee camp, reduced to rubble by an Israeli airstrike. People rushed to the bomb site in Gaza City to free those trapped.
There are a number of martyrs. 11 martyrs arrived at Al-Shifa and Al-Ali hospital and a large number of injuries. Most of the injuries are children and women.
And as civilian casualties grow, Egypt's president has joined the growing calls for a ceasefire to allow urgent aid into the enclave and get hostages home.
We affirm that our brothers in the Gaza Strip are facing an extremely difficult siege, reaching the point of starvation, and it is crucial that aid enters as quickly as possible.
In Lebanon, the coastal city of Sidon came under fire for the first time since Israel opened a second front against the militant group Hezbollah last month. And Israel has attacked the group's backer, Iran, over the weekend, retaliation for a ballistic missile barrage earlier this month.
The attack in Iran was precise and powerful and achieved all of its objectives.
Iran's supreme leader insisting the strikes should not be downplayed or exaggerated.
They are yet to appreciate Iran's power, capability, creativity and willpower. We must make them understand those.
Israel also faces threats from within its own borders. North of Tel Aviv, a truck ploughed into a bus stop outside a military base in Glilot, injuring dozens. Police say the alleged attacker, an Arab Israeli, was shot dead by bystanders.
The investigators will be poring over the wreckage for some time, looking for any clues they can, but we also know that Israel's intelligence service will be looking into this matter, trying to figure out what they can about the driver as they consider if this was a terrorist attack.
Perhaps a tougher question for the intelligence service is how to keep Israelis safe at home. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Glilot.
Coming up on 7:30, more on the power of Qantas. Sarah Ferguson speaks to the journalist who's put flight perks in the spotlight.
How do you describe the relationship between Qantas and Anthony Albanese?
Cosy, comorbid. It's been a long-standing relationship, particularly under the previous leadership. Sometimes if you work the right assets, you get lucky.
Lawyers for journalist Antoinette Lattouf will argue former ABC chair Ida Buttrose and managing director David Anderson were either decision makers or materially involved in her sacking last year. Ms Lattouf is suing the ABC for unfair dismissal in the federal court. She was taken off air partway through a radio presenting stint in December after sharing a social media post about the war in Gaza. The court heard the ABC contends the chief content officer was the decision maker. The journalist argues she was fired for expressing a political opinion and that race was a factor. The ABC denies that. Hundreds of people have gathered in the Southern Highlands to protest against plans for a mega plastic recycling plant. The government has recommended the project at Mossvale goes ahead, but locals say it's in the wrong location.
On Christmas Eve 4 years ago, Bev and Graham Horden found a note in their letterbox.
It's not a good Christmas present, that's for sure.
It was a letter from a new neighbour revealing plans for a 120,000-tonne plastic recycling plant 200 metres from their home. It would span 3 hectares and rise 4 stories. The couple call themselves environmentalists, but say this isn't the right location.
The obvious issues for us and for the community of the 24/7 operation, noise, vibration, light, 380 vehicles a day.
The state government has recommended the project for approval as part of its plan to triple plastic recycling by 2030. Experts say there's a critical need for the plant.
We are really having to lift our game, and I think this is one of those examples where we will be demonstrating that by setting up a recycling facility like this, where we'll be able to create supply chains, innovative supply chains.
The government's recommendation triggered a review by the Independent Planning Commission. On the first of 3 meeting days, the developers have defended the project, while hundreds of locals were unequivocal in telling the IPC it's the wrong site for the factory.
While some community members oppose our efforts, we greatly appreciate those who have provided valuable suggestions to improve the project.
The proponent does not have to be denied permission to recycle plastic in Australia, just not on this site. The proponent has no social licence to do so, and approval of the DA would be contrary to the public interest.
A sentiment the community hopes the IPC takes on board. Kelly Fuller, ABC News, Bowral.
British-Australian mining giant Rio Tinto wants to build a lithium mine so big it could supercharge Europe's renewable energy transition. But the proposal is proving controversial because the valuable mineral would be mined underneath a small community in Serbia. Europe correspondent Mazoe Ford reports from Western Serbia.
This is the Jadar Valley in Western Serbia. Above ground there's forest and farming. Below, Rio Tinto has found lithium. Farmer Zlatko Kokanović's family has lived here for 7 generations. Rio Tinto's bought 50 properties nearby and wants his too.
I don't have any intention of selling my property. I live here with my family. I have made my business here. This land is sacred to me.
Rio Tinto wants to build a mine underneath the agriculture to extract enough lithium for 1 million electric vehicle batteries per year.
We've got enough for at least 40 years of mining, and that would be the largest, longest life highest grade deposit in all of Europe.
So it's pretty valuable to Rio Tinto?
Oh, pretty valuable to the people of Loznica, the people of Serbia and Rio Tinto.
Many Serbians, though, don't believe that. Thousands have turned out to protest, worried about the soil, water and wildlife.
I think that it will destroy our environment.
We've seen a wave of disinformation around the project.
Several scientists in Serbia say the environmental concerns are legitimate.
It's not our job to scare people. Our job is to tell the truth. You cannot have both mine and biodiversity, habitats and landscapes that we have. It's impossible.
Serbia's government is already in talks with car manufacturer Mercedes-Benz, Germany and the EU about the lithium's potential.
It is certainly an economic opportunity, it's a geostrategic opportunity, it's political opportunity.
The minister says the mine will only go ahead if it meets environmental conditions, but opponents believe she's already made up her mind and they're vowing to keep up their fight. Mazoe Ford, ABC News, Western Serbia.
As New South Wales prepares to host a drug summit to discuss law reform, another jurisdiction is marking 1 year since decriminalising small amounts of illicit drugs. Critics of the move in the ACT warned it would lead to increased crime and drug use, but police say that hasn't happened.
Thursday night is uni night in Canberra. Cheaper drinks and no entry fees entice people into the city. It's also the first night of the week for the night crew team. For more than 7 years, St John Ambulance volunteers have been patrolling the city streets. Their aim, to keep people safe on a night out. But a year ago, a change in the ACT's drug laws prompted some concern that nights would get much busier.
The relaxed laws will see people from other parts of the country travel to our nation's capital for drug-fuelled parties.
It's going to become a drug-addled druggy central.
Canberra could become the party capital.
12 months on from the ACT becoming the first jurisdiction in the country to decriminalise small amounts of illicit drugs, these volunteers haven't seen any difference.
I haven't seen an increase or decrease in behaviour.
Among those initially opposed to the laws were police. They were concerned the change could spur first-time drug use and see an increase in crime.
Certainly we haven't seen a significant change in behaviour at all.
But they're keen to reinforce that the laws didn't change the fact drugs are illegal.
We've still continued to undertake our other policing activity, absolutely with a zero-tolerance approach.
Rather than facing a criminal charge, people caught with small amounts of drugs such as ice, heroin and cocaine are now issued a $100 fine or referred to a 1-hour drug education and health assessment. Since the laws came in, 237 people have opted for the assessment, while 13 people have been fined. Since decriminalisation, there's been a 50% jump in the number of samples tested by the city's drug checking service, Qantas.
We haven't noticed any increase in drug use, and I don't think that's been apparent anywhere. But I think people are more comfortable coming forward and seeking help.
While it appears the laws haven't substantially changed life in the capital, they will be independently reviewed next year. Monty Boval, ABC News, Canberra.
To finance, here's Alan Kohler.
The US dollar is surging at the moment because traders and investors now think that it's not a recession in America they have to worry about, but another burst of inflation. And that's because both presidential candidates plan to either increase government spending or cut taxes, or both, and therefore increase the budget deficit, with estimates ranging up to an extra $15 trillion. Now, that sort of fiscal stimulus would make a recession completely impossible and spell the end of any interest rate cuts. Therefore, US dollar up and Aussie dollar down, below 66 for the first time in a while. Good for exporters, bad for travellers. On the share market, there was a spill in the yellowcake aisle, with uranium miner Paladin Energy down 15% after revealing that its attempt to buy a Canadian uranium deposit for $1 billion has been put on hold by the Canadian government for national security reasons, for goodness sake. Oh, and a minute's silence for Mosaic Brands Limited, owner of shops such as Rockman's, Rivers, Noni B and Katie's. It was suspended and put on life support 2 months ago, but the plug was pulled today and it's gone to meet its receiver. The share market as a whole went up a bit. The US market held its breath on Friday, while shares in Tokyo rose 2% today And the crude oil price fell because Israel decided to slap Iran rather than punch it. The Financial Review had an interesting graph today. The number of property investors or landlords is in decline, especially those that are negatively geared. The proportion of taxpayers claiming tax losses has fallen below 10% for the first time in 20 years. And that's finance.
Few performances have gone down in history like Jane Torval and Christopher Dean's Bolero routine. The ice skating couple captured the world's attention at the Sarajevo Winter Olympics 40 years ago, and they're now preparing for an Australian farewell tour.
A legendary duo back in their skates. 40 years ago, Torval and Dean stunned the world with this routine. Skating to Ravel's Bolero, it received almost perfect scores, sweeping gold at major competitions, including at the World Championships. Can you remember that moment?
I do actually, because when we see playbacks, it was almost like kind of a relief that, you know, we'd skated well for the European Championships, the Olympics we'd already won, and the World Championship was the third one. We wanted all three that year.
At that moment, it might have been a relief, but it was also this, like, what's next?
Yeah.
The duo is in Australia to promote their final tour together. That visit in June next year will be the first time the pair have performed here in public since 1994. They say that this tour will be their last before they retire from skating.
We started to really enjoy performing in front of a live audience in big arenas, and to see them enjoying watching us.
And watching on today, perhaps the next Torval and Dean.
It was so amazing. It's a one-life opportunity.
This is what it's all about, the kids.
Yeah.
It's their, you know, the future of what they get out of it. Not everybody's going to be a champion, but it's a discipline.
Practice making for a perfect career, which has never been on thin ice. Digby Worthwaller, ABC News, Sydney.
Let's take a look at the weather, and Tom, a tumultuous start to the week.
Nakari, a southerly change is sweeping through the state, and it's been a wild afternoon of thunderstorms in the northeast. Now, here's the radar. The storms developed over the inland around lunchtime, then tracked towards the Queensland border. Up to 45 millimetres has fallen just inland from Byron Bay, while Evans Head recorded a gust today of 74 kilometres per hour. The storms also dropped hail up to 5 centimetres in diameter around Maclean. There was a brief storm in Penrith at 3:30, but otherwise, Sydney remained mostly dry. Northwesterly winds quickly sent the high to 27 in the city, 5 above average, before the southerly change arrived just before midday and dropped the temperature to 20 by late afternoon. Now, the change did not reach Penrith until 3 p.m, allowing for a top of 32. That was 6 above average and their warmest maximum since April. Last night's minimums were mostly within a few degrees of the average. The state's low was 1 degree at Marangaroo. Today's maximums were as much as 8 above average in the east, Newcastle 30, and that was the city's warmest day since March. But that was before the southerly change arrived this afternoon. Newcastle is now down to 19, and a short time ago, that change was just near Taree. Now, on the satellite, thunderstorms today also formed across southern Queensland, and just a few popped up around the Hunter. On the chart tomorrow, a more settled day under this broad ridge of high pressure, although ongoing moisture will still allow for the odd storm in the state's far northeast. Around the country, it's looking dry for the southern capitals. A storm is possible, though, in Brisbane and also Darwin. For the northeast tomorrow, a medium chance of showers and thunderstorms on the north coast, grading to just a slight risk for the eastern ranges and only the slight chance of a clearing shower for the Hunter. For the southeast, a chilly night, patches of frost on the far southern ranges, then a mostly sunny day, tops of 21 to 24 for the east and around 21 to 25 on the ranges. To the west, will be cool overnight. For the south, the temperatures will drop below 10 degrees. Then tomorrow is looking sunny, heading for 27 in the south and up to 33 degrees for the north. On the waters, strong winds off the far south coast, where the seas will average up to 3 metres. The winds will average 20 knots for the north. Now for Sydney, some low cloud is possible in the morning and there might be a spot of drizzle, but skies should brighten up in the afternoon. East to southeasterly winds to 20 kilometres per hour. Temperature range 15 to 23 degrees in the city, tops of 20 on the beaches and up to 26 in the west. The sun will rise at 5:57 and ahead back to warmer northeasterly winds Wednesday, 25 for the city, 30 in the west. Warm again Thursday ahead of another southerly change. High chance of showers and storms, then cooler with a couple of showers Friday and Saturday in Nakari.
Thanks, Tom. Here's Sarah Ferguson with 7:30.